Okay, hello Angie.
Hello.
Okay, so today we are going to talk about our vegan. We are going to ask about the vegan questions that fall in it. So, the first question we would like to ask: when and why do you become a vegan?
It started when I was 7 years old. It sounds stupid, but I was treading on ants just for fun. It was a very hot summer's day. And suddenly I realised I had no right to kill them. They weren't harming me. And then my mind suddenly jumped to the fact that I ate sheep. We used to have sheep on the hillsides near where I lived in Woodingdean. And I suddenly realised I shouldn't be eating the sheep either because they weren't causing me any harm. So I realised I'd have to stop eating animals. Well, I then suddenly thought I'd better tell my mother because this was such an important bit of realisation that had come to me that I rushed indoors to tell my mother, and she said, but I'd die if I didn't eat animals. Well, I was only 7, I didn't know what to do, I couldn't cook for myself, so I just thought I'd put it on hold until I was a big girl. I knew at the same time that this would change my life. I had that thought in my mind that it would change my life, and of course it did. Then when I was 9, I was at school and I was writing an essay about the dog that they put up in space called Laika. I didn't know the dog's name at the time, but I've remembered her name since. She was put up in space and of course died at some point in the experiment. I wrote an essay saying it was wrong, basically saying if humans wanted to go into space they should do so, but leave dogs out of it. It was obviously a form of vivisection, but I decided it wasn't reasonable. The teacher said to me, very interesting, but humans are more important than animals. You'll realise this as you grow up. Well, I looked at him and thought, are you stupid? Not to the dog. And I couldn't understand why a human being who was supposedly intelligent, and an adult at that, couldn't see that to the dog was the most important. I mean, obviously to each of us, we are important. I'm more important than the person listening to me now, but only from my point of view, because I'm biased. The person listening to me now probably thinks they're more important than I am. But I couldn't understand why this teacher didn't understand. And I remember thinking then that just because people had grown up, it didn't make them more sensible. And in fact, I thought of him as rather stupid from that moment on. And I remember thinking of the world and looking at the world from outside and thinking, who is this person that says, you're important, you're not, you're important, you're not? And it made me angry to think someone was in charge who was dictating who mattered and who didn't. Then I went to secondary school and I began to dislike the religious education lessons because I learned that Jesus sent the Gadarene swine to their deaths because he took out an evil spirit from a man and put them into these 20 or 30 pigs and they threw themselves off a cliff. And I remember thinking, well, if that's compassion and that's religion, I don't want anything to do with it. Because to me, religion wasn't good enough, and I learned at the same time that God is a part of the word good. Well, I decided that they weren't good. Killing pigs just because they happened to be a different species didn't seem right to me. Then throughout my school years, I was always arguing with my friends about how animals were treated. And they used to tell me I was a hypocrite because I ate meat. And of course I did, because I didn't know what else to do, and that did bother me. Then one evening when I was 18, I had money by this time, I was doing a Saturday job. I was going to sleep and I suddenly remembered I'd vowed to stop eating animals. So I realised that in order to avoid all cruelty, I'd have to avoid anything to do with an animal, whether it was leather, silk, milk, cow's milk that is, or anything that was from an animal. I'd have to avoid it to be sure there was no cruelty involved. So the next morning I got up, I knew where a health store was, I went to the health store, bought some lentils and never looked back. I started buying a magazine called His Health because there was nothing else available, and when I did, I discovered the word vegan in there. I'd been a vegan for about a month or so, without knowing there was a word for it. I just knew I avoided animal products. So I checked the word vegan and realised that's what I was, and I was quite pleased to think I was one of them and there must be others out there. I then joined the Vegan Society and went to an AGM and of course met other vegans. There weren't many of us at the time. This was in 1966. There weren't many vegans at the time there, but at least I knew there were other people who felt like I did, and it was a wonderful feeling to know I wasn't isolated. And that was the start of it, really, when I was 18.
Okay, so anything that the vegan cannot eat except meat?
Well, of course, vegans shouldn't eat anything from an animal at all, and it isn't just about eating, it's about wearing or using. So as well as not having dairy or eggs, because all those creatures are abused in some way for people to have dairy or eggs. Obviously, one wouldn't eat meat or fish because that involves the death of the animal, but even dairy and eggs involve the death somewhere along the line. So chickens, male chickens are hatched, but of course they only want to keep female chickens so that females will lay eggs. So the males are killed within hours of being born and they're just put into a crusher. So any man listening to me now should consider the fact that by buying eggs they're actually condemning other males to a horrendous death. It's the same with dairy. The calf is taken away from the mother so that humans can steal the milk. The calves, if the female, will be used in the same way to give loads and loads of milk, which again is unreasonable. But the male calves are unwanted, so they're often killed off again within a few months. They might be used for veal. They used to get sent to France to be used for the veal trade, and that's very cruel. They're not given any proper food, and they're just fed on a sort of milk. But all these animals, the calves are babies, and they're taken away from their parents and their mothers at a time when they need them most. So it's all the kind of thing that a vegan would want to avoid. Vegans also won't wear products that like leather or silk, because that involves killing animals or treating them in some inhumane way. Vegans also, of course, won't go to circuses or zoos where people abuse the animals. I call them pimps, actually, the people that go to circuses, or the people that use these animals in circuses. They're pimping on the animals that they've got, the lions, the tigers, whatever they're using. And sadly, in this country, they said about 10 years ago that they were going to stop circuses from having wild animals. We're still waiting for that bill to be passed. But while the Tories are in, I don't see anything happening in the near future. So I would again urge people to avoid going anywhere where animals are kept in prison just for the entertainment of humans.
Do you think being a vegan can help the environment or aid the problem of global warming?
Apparently, you can read this anywhere on the internet, apparently animal eating is the worst way of contributing to global warming. Partly because the animals are just there breathing, as are we. Our numbers are far too great, but in order to feed the human beings that exist on the planet, lots of animals are also, even more in number, are being created. And of course they're breathing. Not only are they breathing, they're using water, they're also giving up methane as well as carbon dioxide. So they are contributing in their vast numbers to global warming. But of course the government doesn't seem to want to admit that, so they keep talking about plastics, they keep talking about travel, people flying. Obviously people can reduce the amount of time they spend in their cars or travelling by air, but how often does a person fly? You know, once a year perhaps, whereas animal eating is something some people do 3 times a day. So it's really a case of cutting down those animal numbers. And of course some people then say, oh well, sheep won't exist or pigs won't exist. But to exist in a form of slavery is not worth having as an existence. If the animals are never created in the first place, they won't miss out because they won't know anything about it. The only people that might listen sheep on the hillside are humans, and that's only because they're thinking of their next meal.
Do you think the UK government support veganism?
Sorry?
Vegetarianism. Do you think UK government support vegans, or do you think that is support of vegetarianism?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but I don't think much of vegetarians because they don't do enough. They're still abusing cows for the dairy, for the milk and cheese, and they're still abusing chickens for the eggs. So I don't think much of vegetarianism. Some people might see it as a stepping stone, but it wasn't for me. I managed to go vegan overnight, didn't do me any harm. So I don't see why other people wouldn't do the same if they want to avoid cruelty.
Is there any big vegan community in Brighton or Sussex? How does it usually work?
There's lots of vegan communities in Brighton, and Brighton is a brilliant place for vegans now. There's so many vegan restaurants. I'm in Roadshack at the moment, which is in Peacehaven, which is outside Brighton, and even here we have a vegan cafe, which is wonderful. There are lots of meetups that take place in the Roadshack and in the Loving Hut in Brighton, regular meetups every week or every month, so new vegans can come along and find out more, or even vegans who've been vegan for years can make more friends. There are also the Vegan Runners, which is a group. It's a national group where they meet up in parks to do the 5K park runs, and they do more serious runs than that as well. And that's a great community because you all feel you feel that you know other vegans. It's very easy to get to know other vegans. You just